He thought it was just another blind date, until the girl leaned in and whispered, "I'm not here for dinner. I'm here to thank you for saving my life." Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Ethan Ward sat by the cafe window, absently stirring his coffee as the early afternoon crowd buzzed around him. The place was elegant yet familiar, a spot his assistant always chose when she wanted to keep things professional but comfortable. He had been here 3 times before for investor meetings, each one forgettable, but today felt different. His assistant, Clara, had been unusually secretive when she booked this lunch. All she'd said was, "Someone wants to thank you personally. Please don't decline." He had assumed it was another blind date disguised as business, something Clara had been guilty of more than once. Ethan checked his watch again. 12:45. 15 minutes past the arranged time. He sighed, leaned back in his chair, and watched the city life flow by outside, the endless blur of movement that never stopped to breathe. That was how his life felt lately, a constant motion without meaning. He was 35, the head of a growing company known for green energy innovation. The world saw him as successful, polished, confident. Inside, however, Ethan carried a quiet loneliness that no number of business awards could silence. Every morning, he woke up and wondered if he was truly making a difference, or just keeping himself too busy to notice the emptiness. He was about to finish his coffee and leave when the bell above the cafe door chimed. A young woman stepped in, glancing around nervously. She wasn't the usual type who came here for power lunches. She looked composed yet uncertain, her hands gripping a small leather bag as though it contained something precious. Her eyes found him, and for a moment she froze, as if rehearsing something silently. Then, taking a breath, she walked toward him. "Mr. Ward?" she asked softly. Ethan rose instinctively. "Yes, and you are—" "Lila Hart," she said, offering her hand. "Thank you for meeting me." Her voice had a fragile steadiness, like someone trying hard not to let emotions spill through. Ethan gestured for her to sit. "My assistant said you wanted to thank me for something, but I'm afraid she didn't explain what this is about." "I know," Lila said, folding her hands in her lap. "She told me you don't like surprises, but this isn't a usual meeting." Ethan gave a half smile. "That much I can tell." "Are you a journalist? A client?" She shook her head quickly. "No, nothing like that. She paused, her throat tightening. "You probably don't remember me." "It was 10 years ago." Ethan frowned slightly, studying her face. There was something faintly familiar about her, the shape of her eyes, maybe, or the way her lips trembled before she spoke. 10 years is a long time," he said. "Where did we meet?" Her gaze dropped to the table, then lifted again, shining with tears she was trying to hold back. "You met me on a bridge, late at night." It was raining. Ethan's breath caught. For a moment, the sound of the cafe faded, replaced by the echo of distant thunder in his memory. A dark road, the reflection of streetlights on wet pavement, a shadow of someone standing where no one should stand. I don't understand," he whispered. "You stopped your car," she continued, her voice trembling now. "I was standing on the railing, ready to let go. You talked to me for an hour, maybe more. You kept saying things that didn't make sense at the time, but somehow made me believe I could survive one more day." The air left Ethan's lungs. He pressed a hand to his forehead, stunned by the clarity rushing back. "That was you?" Lila nodded, tears spilling freely now. "You told me that pain isn't forever, and that someone somewhere needs me to survive. You didn't even ask my name. You just stayed until help arrived." He sat back slowly, his pulse thundering in his ears. "I remember," he murmured. "God, I tried to forget that night. You were just a child." "I was 15, she said, "and I thought my life was already over. I'd been bullied for years, and my parents were falling apart. I didn't see any reason to keep breathing." She smiled faintly through her tears. "But then this man in a dark suit stopped his car in the pouring rain just to tell me I mattered." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat aching. "I never knew what happened after the responders took you. I asked, but they wouldn't tell me. Confidentiality. I went into therapy," Lila said. I spent months trying to understand how to live again. It wasn't easy. But every time I wanted to give up, I remembered what you said. Be brave for one more day. He stared at her, speechless. This woman sitting across from him, confident, alive, whole, was the same terrified girl he'd once begged not to jump. The realization sent a shiver through him. You remembered my words? Every one of them, she said quietly. I even wrote them down that night in the hospital. I didn't know your name, but I promised myself that if I ever found you, I'd thank you. Ethan leaned back, lost in thought. 10 years, he whispered. You've been carrying this for 10 years. Yes, Lila said. I searched for you for almost 4. I didn't even know if you were real. Then one day, I read an article about your company's green tech project, and I saw your photo. I knew instantly. You were the man from the bridge. Ethan felt the world tilt slightly, a surreal mix of past and present colliding. He had always wondered if that night had meant anything. He had driven home drenched, shaken and strangely hollow, telling himself he'd only done what anyone would do. But clearly not everyone would have. Why now? He asked gently. Why reach out after so long? Because I finally have something to show you, she said, opening her bag. She pulled out a small envelope, then hesitated, holding it to her chest. Not yet, she whispered. I'll give it to you later. For now, I just wanted to see you face to face. To let you know that I'm okay. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. You look more than okay, Lila. She smiled softly. I am. Because of that night, I learned that even in the darkest moments, someone's kindness can rewrite your entire life. You probably don't even remember everything you said, but those words saved me. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe noise faded into a distant hum. Ethan felt as if time had folded in on itself, 10 years collapsing into a single heartbeat. I don't know what to say, he finally murmured. You don't have to say anything, Lila said. You already said it when I needed it most. Ethan looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the broken girl from that night, but a survivor. A living reminder that one moment of compassion could ripple far beyond anything he'd imagined. He had spent years chasing success, yet here sat the most meaningful result of his life, and it wasn't measured in money or milestones. The waitress approached with a refill, and Lila wiped her eyes quickly, smiling in embarrassment. Sorry, she whispered. This wasn't how I planned it. It's okay, Ethan said softly. You just gave me a reason to believe again. When she finally left, the cafe felt strangely quiet. Ethan sat staring at the empty chair across from him, his mind replaying her words. Be brave for one more day. He hadn't realized until now how much he'd needed to hear them again himself. Outside, the afternoon light shifted, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt something stir inside him, something like peace, something like purpose. He didn't yet understand why destiny had brought that girl back into his life, but deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The rain that night had fallen like a curtain, blurring the world into shadows and silver streaks of light. Ethan remembered it now in vivid detail, the sound of tires hissing on wet asphalt, the hum of the engine beneath his hands, the faint ache behind his eyes from working too late. It had been one of those nights when exhaustion felt heavier than gravity, when he had questioned the point of everything he was building. His father had died the previous year, leaving him the company far earlier than expected. He'd been 25, brilliant, ambitious, but lost. He hadn't meant to stop at the bridge. He had simply seen movement through the storm, a flicker of color, a silhouette against the guardrail, and instinct had made him slow down. At first, he thought it was a pedestrian stranded by the rain. Then lightning flashed, and he saw the truth. A girl standing on the wrong side of the railing, her arms wrapped around the cold metal, hair plastered to her face, shoes inches from the edge. He pulled over without thinking. The rain hit him like needles the moment he opened the door. He remembered calling out over the wind, "Hey, it's not safe there!" The girl didn't move. Her voice was faint when it came through the storm. "Please go away." But Ethan didn't leave. Something in her tone, so final, so empty, rooted him to the spot. He took a step forward, careful not to startle her. "I won't come closer if you don't want me to," he said, voice steady but kind. "But I can't just drive off and pretend I didn't see you." The girl looked barely 15. She wore a school uniform soaked through, her backpack lying open on the ground behind her. "You don't understand," she whispered. "There's nothing left for me." Ethan remembered the pain in those words, because he'd once said the same thing at 16, standing in a hospital corridor after losing both his parents. The world had seemed pointless then. The only reason he hadn't given up was because an older man, his father's friend, had found him and said the same words Ethan now repeated to her. "I think I do understand," he told her quietly. "You think it's over, but it's not. Pain tricks you into believing it lasts forever, but it doesn't." The girl shook her head, her shoulders trembling. "You don't even know me. Why do you care?" "Because someone once cared about me when I thought nobody would," Ethan said, "and that changed everything." The wind howled, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Then Ethan took off his jacket and laid it across the railing beside her. "Can I tell you something?" She didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. "When I was 16, he said, voice low, "I lost both my parents in a car crash. I spent months feeling like I was walking through fog, like every breath hurt. I used to sit in my room and ask why it happened to me. I didn't want to be here anymore. One night I almost made the same choice you're thinking about, but someone stopped me. He told me that pain is temporary, but death is permanent. That someday I would meet someone who needed me to survive that night. That's why I'm here." The girl's lips parted slightly. "You think I'll matter to someone?" "I know you will," Ethan said. "Maybe you can't see it now, but you will. Someone out there is waiting for the version of you who makes it through tonight." The rain softened, turning into a mist. Ethan saw her grip on the railing loosen slightly. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lila," she murmured. "Lila," he repeated gently. "I'm Ethan. I promise I won't let you face this alone. Can you step down? Just one step. I'm right here." She stared at him for what felt like forever, the conflict raging across her face. Then slowly, terribly slowly, she moved one foot back onto the concrete. Her fingers clung to the railing for a moment longer before she stepped down fully. Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He took a cautious step forward and draped his jacket around her shoulders. She was shaking violently, though whether from the cold or from fear he couldn't tell. "I called for help," he said quietly. "They'll be here soon." Lila's tears mixed with the rain. "You don't even know me," she said again, "and you stayed." "That's what people are supposed to do," Ethan replied. "We show up for each other when it matters most." The flashing lights arrived minutes later, an ambulance, a police cruiser, and a crisis counselor who approached with calm expertise. Lila didn't resist when they spoke to her, but before she left, she looked back at Ethan. "Will it ever stop hurting?" "Yes," Ethan said softly. "Not all at once, but one day you'll wake up and realize you survived, and you'll be proud of that." The counselor guided her into the car, and Ethan watched them drive away, rain blurring the taillights into streaks of red. He stood there. Long after they'd gone, the storm washing over him, unsure whether he'd done enough or said the right thing, but something deep inside whispered that maybe he had. Years later, sitting in the cafe across from Lila, Ethan finally understood the truth. He had said exactly what she needed to hear. Lila's voice brought him back to the present. "That night changed everything," she said. "I didn't know it then, but your words planted something in me, a tiny spark that refused to die. Even when I didn't want to keep going, that spark kept whispering, 'Just one more day.'" Ethan listened silently as she spoke. Her story unfolded like a map of pain and survival. She told him about the hospital stays, the therapy sessions, the long silences at home where her parents finally realized how badly they'd failed her. She spoke about the journals she filled with his words, about the slow, stubborn rebuilding of her sense of worth. "I used to sit by my window and watch the sunrise," she said. "I'd tell myself, he said one more day, so this is it, just today. Some days I hated you for it because living felt like climbing a mountain barefoot. But eventually I began to see why you said it. Because every day I stayed, life gave me something new. A friend who listened, a teacher who cared, a moment of peace that felt like sunlight after years of storm." Ethan felt his chest tighten with emotion. "You did the hard part, Lila. I only stopped the car." She smiled faintly. "No, you did more. You saw me when nobody else did. You treated me like I mattered." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. The noise of the cafe faded again, replaced by the sound of rain in his memory. That night he had thought he was saving a stranger. Now he realized she had saved him too, from his own disillusionment, from the idea that kindness no longer mattered. "I kept that jacket, you know," Lila said softly. "The one you gave me. My mum washed it and folded it, and I've had it ever since. It reminded me that there are still good people in the world." He smiled sadly. "I never thought I'd see it again." "You won't," she said, laughing through her tears. "It's old and faded now, but I still wear it when it rains." They talked for over an hour, about life, about healing, about the invisible threads that connect people in the strangest ways. For Ethan, it felt like breathing fresh air after years underground. For Lila, it felt like closing a chapter she'd been afraid to finish. When the conversation paused, she reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope again. "You said you didn't know if that night mattered," she whispered. "This will prove that it did. Read it when you're alone." Ethan nodded, unable to trust his voice. As she stood to leave, Lila placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. "You told me once that someone would need me someday," she said. "You were right. I became that someone for others. That's why I'm here, to thank you for giving me the chance to live long enough to become the person I was meant to be." Ethan watched her walk away, sunlight spilling through the cafe windows and catching in her hair. It felt unreal, like the end of a dream he never expected to revisit. Outside, the city had moved on, unaware of the two lives that had intersected again after a decade. Ethan sat for a long time, the unopened envelope before him. He thought about the bridge, the rain, the trembling voice that had asked if it would ever stop hurting. Now he knew the answer. Yes, it would. It had. When he finally rose to leave, he felt something shift inside him, a quiet certainty that perhaps his life's real purpose had nothing to do with business or success. Maybe it had always been about moments like that night, when one person's decision to stop and listen could change the course of another's life forever. And somewhere deep down, he realized that destiny wasn't finished with their story yet. That evening, Ethan drove home through streets painted gold by the setting sun, Lila's envelope lying on the passenger seat like something fragile and sacred. He hadn't opened it yet. He couldn't, not while the weight of their meeting still pressed softly against his chest, like a memory refusing to fade. As the traffic lights blinked lazily to green, his mind wandered back to the girl on the bridge, the trembling voice, the desperate eyes, the cold rain. He'd replayed that night so many times over the years that it had become both a wound and a reminder. He'd told himself he did what anyone would have done, but deep down he knew that wasn't true. Most people would have kept driving. Most people had. He remembered the cars that had passed before him that night, their headlights slicing through the rain without stopping. And yet, for reasons he still didn't understand, he had stopped. Maybe because he saw his own reflection in her fear. Maybe because some invisible force had guided him to that moment. When he reached home, the sky had turned indigo. His apartment felt unusually still. the kind of silence that carries its own heartbeat. He placed the envelope on his desk, beside an old photograph of his father. The frame was worn, edges chipped, but his father's eyes still held that same calm strength Ethan had always admired. He poured himself a glass of water, sat down, and turned the envelope over in his hands. It was light, almost weightless, sealed with care. Lila's handwriting was small and deliberate. On the front were 2 words, "For the man who stopped." Ethan hesitated. His fingers trembled slightly as he broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter and a photograph. He placed the photo aside and began to read. "Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I finally got to thank you face to face. I don't think words can ever explain what that night meant to me, but I'll try. You once said that someone out there would need me one day. At the time, I didn't believe you. I thought you were just saying that to keep me alive for another minute. But you were right, because a few years after that night, I met someone who needed me the same way I once needed you. Her name was Mia. She was 14, quiet, withdrawn, and always sitting alone after class. I was in college by then, studying psychology, trying to understand the things that almost destroyed me. One day I saw her standing on the school rooftop, looking down with the same emptiness I once carried. And in that moment, everything came full circle. I remembered the rain, your voice, the jacket around my shoulders. And without thinking, I ran toward her. I told her the same words you told me, that pain doesn't last forever, that she mattered even if she couldn't see it yet. I didn't even realize I was crying until she turned to look at me and whispered, "Why do you care?" And I said, "Because someone once cared enough to stop for me." She didn't jump, Ethan. She's alive. She's in therapy now. She draws, she laughs, she's learning to trust the world again. And every time I see her smile, I think of you. So you see, that night didn't just save me. It saved Mia, and maybe someday it'll save someone else through her. The kindness you showed rippled outward. It didn't end on that bridge. People say one act of compassion can change the world. I used to think that was just something people said to sound poetic. But I know now, it's true. Because your kindness became my courage, and my courage became her hope. That's how the world heals. One choice at a time. Thank you for stopping the car. Ethan, thank you for staying, with all my heart. Lila. By the time he finished reading, Ethan's eyes were wet. The words blurred together, the ink rippling where his tears fell. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, then finally turned over the photograph that had fallen from the envelope. It showed 3 people. Lila, in the middle, smiling radiantly, one arm around a younger girl with bright eyes and the other around an older woman, probably her mother. They stood in front of a small community center, its sign barely visible, the Bridge Foundation, because one moment can save a life. Underneath the photo, written in neat handwriting, were 5 simple words, inspired by the man who stopped. Ethan pressed the photo to his chest, overcome by a wave of emotion he hadn't felt in years, something between pride and humility, joy and sorrow. For the first time since his father's death, he truly understood what legacy meant. It wasn't about money or success or the size of the company he ran. It was about moments, tiny, invisible choices that reached further than he could ever imagine. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the city drifting through his window. Somewhere out there, a girl named Mia was alive because of a single decision he'd made on a stormy night 10 years ago. He thought of his father again, the way he'd always told Ethan, "The world doesn't need perfect men. It needs good ones who try." Maybe at last, he'd become one. The next morning, Ethan drove to the address written on the bottom of Lila's letter. It led him to a small building on the edge of town, nothing fancy, just a converted warehouse painted in bright colors. A mural covered one wall, hands reaching toward a sunrise with the words, "You matter more than you know." Inside, children and teens filled the room, painting, talking, laughing. Volunteers moved between them, offering snacks and guidance. It felt alive, hopeful. "Can I help you, sir?" A woman at the desk asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "I'm looking for Lila," he said. "She's in the art room," the woman replied, motioning toward a door at the far end. When he entered, he found Lila surrounded by students, helping them paint a large canvas that said, "One more day." She turned when she heard him, surprise lighting her face. "You came," she said softly. "I had to see it," Ethan replied. "The foundation. It's incredible," she smiled. "It's not just mine. It belongs to everyone who needed a reason to stay." They walked together through the building as Lila explained how the organization had started, how she'd turned her pain into purpose, her story into strength. The center offered counseling, art therapy, and workshops for families learning to understand mental health. "I wanted to build a place where nobody feels invisible," she said, "where someone will always stop." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. "Your father must be proud of you." Lila looked at him with kind eyes. "Maybe, but I think he'd want me to tell you. Thank you for showing me what it means to be seen." Later, when Ethan stood outside beneath the morning sun, he noticed a small plaque near the entrance. It read, "Dedicated to Ethan Cole, the stranger who stopped the rain." He stared at it for a long time, his chest tightening with something that felt like peace. He hadn't expected to be remembered. He hadn't even thought he deserved to be. But now, seeing what had grown from one act of compassion, he finally understood the truest legacy is not what we leave behind, but who we lift along the way. As he walked back to his car, a light drizzle began to fall, soft, warm, and familiar. Ethan tilted his head to the sky and smiled. For the first time in years, the rain didn't feel heavy. It felt like a blessing. A month later, Ethan found himself back on the same bridge where it had all begun. The sky was the same muted grey, the air carrying that faint metallic scent of rain. The river below shimmered with a restless current, whispering the same endless song it had a decade ago. He parked his car in almost the exact same spot, turned off the engine and sat there for a long time, staring at the place where a terrified girl had once stood on the edge between life and death. So much had changed. And yet, somehow everything felt the same. He stepped out of the car slowly, his shoes crunching against the damp pavement. The wind tugged gently at his coat, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic. Standing at the railing, he let his fingers trace the cold metal. For a moment he could almost see her there again, soaked to the bone, trembling, eyes full of tears and hopelessness. But now that memory didn't feel like a ghost haunting him. It felt like a story that had finally found its ending. Ethan closed his eyes and exhaled. That night had defined him for years without him realizing it. It had become a silent compass, shaping every choice he'd made since. The guilt he once carried of not doing enough, of not saying the perfect words, had transformed into something else. Gratitude. Gratitude that he'd been in the right place at the right time. Gratitude that he had listened to his instincts instead of ignoring them. Gratitude that one act of courage had echoed through lives he'd never even met. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded note, Lila's second letter. She had given it to him the day he visited her foundation. Telling him to read it when he returned to the bridge, he unfolded it carefully. The paper soft and creased at the edges. "Dear Ethan, if you're reading this, you're back where it all began. I don't know what brought you there today, but I imagine you're standing by that same railing, wondering about everything that's happened since. I hope when you look at this place now, you don't see pain anymore. I hope you see proof that small actions can save entire lifetimes. That bridge used to be my ending. Now it's my beginning. Every week I come here to leave flowers for the version of myself who stood there years ago. Not to mourn her, but to thank her. Because even though she wanted to give up, she stayed. And because she stayed, I got to build a life filled with purpose, laughter, and people who matter. You once said that pain tricks us into believing it lasts forever. You were right. It doesn't, but kindness, real kindness, does. It outlives us in ways we'll never fully see. The foundation is growing faster than I ever dreamed. We've helped dozens of teens find their way back from the edge. And each time I hear a story of someone choosing to live one more day, I think of you. Sometimes when I'm speaking to them, I use your exact words. I tell them that pain is temporary, that there's someone out there who needs the version of them that survives. I see it in their eyes, the flicker of belief returning, the spark you once lit in me. I wish you could see what your words have done, Ethan, but I know deep down you don't need to. Because good people never help others for recognition. They do it because it's right. Still, I hope you'll let yourself be proud. Because of you, there's a whole world of people who never jumped. Thank you for stopping, for caring, for being the proof that humanity still has light. With love and endless gratitude, Lila. Ethan lowered the letter slowly, his throat tightening. The wind tugged at the paper like it wanted to carry her words away, to scatter them across the river so others could read them too. He stood in silence for a long time, letting her message sink into him. The city lights flickered on one by one behind him, reflections trembling across the water. He thought of his father again, of all the nights he'd sat alone after the accident, wondering if the world was just chaos and loss. And now, standing here, he finally understood the lesson his father had tried to teach him. That life isn't about avoiding pain, but about what we choose to do in the face of it. Maybe the universe had brought him here that night, not just to save Lila, but to save himself too. As the rain began to fall again, light and steady, Ethan leaned over the railing and let a single flower drop into the river below. He watched it float away, its petals spinning gently on the current until it disappeared into the distance. He smiled faintly. "Thank you, Lila," he whispered, "for reminding me what it means to keep going." The sound of approaching footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. He turned and froze. A young woman, maybe 18 or 19, was standing a few feet away. Her face was pale, her eyes red, and she clutched a small, crumpled note in her hands. For a moment, Ethan's heart lurched painfully, an echo of déjà vu. She hesitated, glancing at him nervously. I just needed to be somewhere quiet," she murmured. "I'm not bothering you, am I?" Ethan shook his head gently. "Not at all." The girl turned toward the river, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't think anyone else came here." He studied her for a moment, recognizing that fragile tone, the one Lila once had, the one that carried too much pain for someone so young. "I come here sometimes," Ethan said softly. "It helps to think." She nodded, silent tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's been hard lately. Feels like everything's falling apart." He took a slow step closer, keeping his tone calm and kind. "I know what that feels like. But can I tell you something?" She looked up, eyes full of confusion and quiet despair. "What?" "Sometimes the world breaks us," he said, "not to end us, but to open us. To help us find others who know how to hold the broken pieces together." The girl blinked, her lip trembling. "Do you really believe that?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I didn't once. But someone taught me to." They stood there in silence for a moment as the rain deepened, each drop a soft rhythm against the metal railing. Finally, the girl took a shaky breath and nodded. "Maybe I'll try. One more day." Ethan's eyes softened. "That's all it takes." She turned away, walking slowly toward the end of the bridge, and for a fleeting moment, Ethan could have sworn he saw another presence beside her, a shadow of the girl Lila once was, smiling faintly, walking with her through the storm. He exhaled deeply, feeling something inside him settle. The rain stopped. The clouds thinned, and through the clearing sky, sunlight broke through, soft and golden, painting the river in light. Ethan looked up and smiled, whispering the words he knew by heart now. One small act can change everything. He turned, walking back to his car, leaving behind the bridge that had once been a place of despair, but now stood as a monument of hope. And as the wind carried his footprints away, it also carried a truth that would ripple through the years, that sometimes the quiet kindness of one person can save an entire world they'll never see.